The Albanese government kept slapping Donald Trump around, refused even his demand that we spend more on our defence, and now Australia must pay the price. The US Defence Department says it's going to review our deal to buy the American nuclear submarines we critically need. A Defence Department official said the department is reviewing AUKUS as part of ensuring that this initiative of the previous administration is aligned with the President's America First agenda. As Secretary Hegseth, the Defence Secretary, has made clear, this means ensuring the highest readiness of our service members, that allies step up fully to do their part for collective defence. Note that bit carefully, that allies step up fully to do their part for collective defence, and that the defence industrial base is meeting our needs. Now, all this is after Prime Minister Anthony Albanese handed over $500 million to help America build what we thought were our submarines and sell us at least 3, maybe even 5 of them to start replacing our ageing Collins-class submarines. And if we don't have them, that leaves us even weaker as China prepares for war. So that would be then a massive embarrassment for the government and a massive blow, of course, for Australia. Now, of course, it's not certain at all that the US is going to, in fact, pull the plug. In fact, this AUKUS deal helps America as much as Australia, and a deal should be a deal. But that said, the man doing this review is Elbridge Colby, his Under-Secretary of Defence for Policy, and he did warn 3 months ago that it would be stupid for America to give Australia some of these Virginia and Columbia-class nuclear subs when it was having trouble building enough for itself to meet the China threat.
If we can produce the attack submarines in sufficient number and sufficient speed, then great. But if we can't, that becomes a very difficult problem because we don't want our servicemen and women to be in a weaker position and more vulnerable, and God forbid worse, because they're not in the right place in the right time.
We just have to be careful as we try to produce an Australian capacity that we don't end up in a time period where we're sort of less than we would otherwise be.
And that's the issue. America's simply not building subs quick enough to replace them and meet the China threat. But that's not all the factors at play here. Because again and again, we come back to the fact that America is not just asking, it's demanding that we pay more for our own defence. And that's a demand that actually comes right from the top. Donald Trump's warning to all allies, he will not defend those who don't spend enough to defend themselves.
If you're not going to pay your bills, we're not going to defend you.
And Elbridge Colby, the man doing this review, he has himself warned that the main concern the United States should press with Australia is higher defence spending. Australia is currently well below the 3% level advocated for NATO. And Canberra actually faces far more powerful challenge in China. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth privately told our Defence Minister, Richard Marles, that China was a huge threat and Australia had to ramp up its defence spending from its pathetic 2% of GDP today to 3.5%, very fast. Marles refused to even tell journalists what the US wanted, so Hegseth embarrassed him by publishing it on his website. 3.5% and as soon as possible. And just overnight, Hegseth has again put us and other allies on notice.
President Trump looks to those allies and partners to step up, to share in the burden of their own defense. It's only fair that our allies and partners do their part. We can't want their security more than they do.
So, given all these warnings, again and again, how stupid is our government to almost go out of its way to offend all those officials from Donald Trump down, and for a start, by refusing to pull our weight in defending our own country instead of just relying on the US. Our Prime Minister has repeatedly brushed off Hegseth's call to spend 3.5% of our GDP on our defence. Albanese suggested his government was spending enough already and it wasn't America's call anyway.
What we'll do is we'll determine our defence policy, and we've invested just across the forwards an additional $10 billion in defence. But
worse, the government didn't even stop there. I pointed only yesterday in my newspaper column that the Albanese government was almost deliberately offending Trump now, playing with fire by striking stupid left-wing poses. For instance, last week, it cancelled a visa for an American Jew, tech expert Hillel Fuld, claiming it was somehow a danger to our safety or good order because he posted a defence of Israel and a warning about Islamic radicalism, even though Trump's administration has warned against allies censoring Americans. And when America's ambassador appealed to Australia to lift Fuld's ban, he too was brushed off. And this week, of course, Australia slapped sanctions on two hard-right ministers of Israel's government, infuriating US State Secretary Marco Rubio, who said the United States condemns the sanctions imposed by the governments of the United Kingdom, Canada, Norway, New Zealand and Australia on two sitting members of the Israeli cabinet. He said these sanctions do not advance US-led efforts to achieve a ceasefire, bring hostages home, end the war, and we remind our partners not to forget who the real enemy is. We did all that. Now comes the punishment, this review of the submarines deal. But our Defence Minister, Richard Marles, he was playing it cool today, like, this review's nothing to worry about, it's just ticking a box.
Look, I am comfortable about it, and think it's a pretty natural step for an incoming government to take. I do have a sense of confidence about the way in which AUKUS is playing out under the Trump administration, and that we will meet the pathway that we have committed to.
Now, it is true. The US could well work out that selling us these submarines still makes sense. Sense for the US as much as sense for us, because it really is about making us both stronger against the Chinese threat, as pointed out today by former Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who actually negotiated this AUKUS deal.
Australia's defence is served by us acting in partnership with our allies. That's how it works. The idea that Australia unilaterally can undertake this is absurd. It's fanciful. The US has every right to go and look at things from time to time. I wouldn't overread that. But we should understand that our defence and our security depends on our network of alliances. And as far as AUKUS is concerned, it's the strongest one and the most important one we've struck in 70 years. And it's the one that I've noticed that the Chinese in particular have really reacted to, probably more than any other I've seen. So that tells you something, I think, about its strategic merit.
All true. Yet the US still could decide it's safer to keep its submarines for itself, and not just because it doesn't have enough. Why sell subs that it needs for itself to a foreign government that right now seems unreliably left-wing, against America or American allies? And that's why the Albanese government has been so stupid to have poisoned the well at this very point, and especially by refusing to spend a lot more on our defence. I mean, we should have been spending this anyway, because as Joe Hockey, a former Australian ambassador to Washington, said today, one thing we now desperately need is to build our own war-fighting capacity right here.
We've learnt from Ukraine, if you don't make your own weapons, if you don't build your own military, then you can't necessarily rely on foreigners to pick up the tabs when you really need it. And if we need a reminder of it, it's come overnight from the United States. We can't solely rely on them for the supply of our military equipment and our technology. We partner with them, we need them as a partner, but we have to have our own industrial base. And at the moment, that is under significant threat.
Thing is, America might now be thinking exactly the same. An American submarine in Australian hands is not as reliable as one in America's, especially when there's an Australian government right now that is treating US requests with contempt. Could the US really rely on the Australian government to sail our submarines to back America if it meant that we'd then be at war with China as well? Just think about that. But like I said, this AUKUS deal may and probably will still go through, but it's now going to cost a lot more. Billions more spent on our defence. That's what the Americans are in effect saying is the price we must now pay for our submarines. And if you think that's too much, then think how much more we'd have to pay to defend ourselves without them.